Wing Williams, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Brad Hook, thank you for having me.
Did you really create a treaty with mosquitoes?
I did. Yes, there is some context necessary for that story. So, to begin, when I was a little boy, I spent most of my time in the forest. And when I say spending time in the forest, I don't mean just walking through it, but really observing every detail of it. The way that the leaves rustled, the way that the birds sang, the way that the beavers swam, the way seasons changed animal and plant behavior. So when I was hiking the Appalachian Trail in 2010, at the age of 24, I already had a deep familiarity with the forest beyond what I noticed a lot of the other hikers seemed to walk with. Now, I started hiking the Appalachian Trail on April 10th, a day that I later dubbed Wing Day because April 10th is the day I like to begin new grand things. So on April 10th, down in mountainous northwestern Georgia, the leaves were only beginning to bud on the trees. Snow fell on the mountain tops. Rain covered our skin and our bags and our tents and whatever we had every single day. Well, when spring really erupted into a canopy of verdant hues and everything that was slowly budding in those cold nights came to life, and the bugs swarmed all of us, most of the hikers and myself included, were swatting away at them, really having to face this monstrosity that is millions of mosquitoes.
Mm.
And yet, as I sat there swatting, as I saw everybody don their bug nets and put on the bug spray, I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way. I mean, there's got to be a symbiotic relationship that I can cultivate. And
Mm.
so by carrying the deep observance that I had learned as a boy in the forest, I decided to apply n- an idea I had in my mind. Let's see if this will work. And so I stopped swatting at the bugs, and through a silent communication, if you will, of accepting them and kind of oozing from my mind, will you accept me? I began this practice of living with them and not fighting back against them. And it took a lot of patience. It took a lot of resisting, swatting at the bugs when they would land all over you. But I started to find that I was making progress until the day set upon me where the bugs were no longer biting me. They would land all over me, but they weren't biting me. And all the other hikers to say, Hot Wing was my trail name. Hot Wing, what are you doing? How did you manage this? And I would tell them my inner work and how this came to be. And they would either laugh at me or they would say, I don't have time for that. And they would continue to use bug spray and bug nets. But I then walked north without being disturbed or bitten by another bug pretty much ever again in my life.
That's amazing. And it hints at, I don't know, deeper layers of presence and interaction with the world that we hardly tap into, that perhaps our ancestors did. But I hear that you also learned how not to be affected by things like poison ivy or poodle dog bush and
Right,
so
right.
forth. Tell us about that.
Sure. So that was kind of an extension of the bug experiment turned bug success. Yeah, you think about every living creature. Everything has a certain amount of energy that we carry. A lot of our energy that we hold, or at least in a predatory world, is an energy stored for defense. And so, just as I felt that I had created a treaty with the bugs, one day I got in poison ivy, and I was rubbing jewel weed all over my poison ivy, and jewel weed is the natural antidote that grows near poison ivy. And again, forests are just so beautiful in the way that they offer an antidote often to the thing that brings us down or inhibits us. And so as I was sitting there, I started to think, just like I created this weird new relationship with the bugs, I must be able to do such a thing with the plants, for the plants have this defense to continue their life. And so when something disrupts it, they employ this defense for their own protection, just like an animal can sense when you have fear. And same goes with humans and whatnot. It extends through all of our natural ecosystems. So I decided to start treating the plants with the same kind of quiet respect that I was treating the bugs. Now, this began to work, so much so to the point that for the rest of the Appalachian Trail, even when I would brush up against poison ivy, I would do so in a respectful, gentle manner. I am just passing through. I am not trampling upon. And then let's fast forward 2 years, 3 years later to the Pacific Crest Trail. Poodle dog in the western portions of the United States is this plant that it's nasty. It's got a poison, much like poison ivy or poison oak carries, and it grows in areas where wildfires have come through and devastated the land. And the poodle dog is often one of the first plants that starts growing back in that area. Well, I had a hiking buddy I made on the trail named G. In many places on the Pacific Crest Trail, they are closed for different reasons. And we were sitting at the entrance of a closed section because of the poodle dog, which had grown rapidly and spread all over the trail for the next, say, 10 miles. So all the other hikers were taking a detour, walking a dirt road around as opposed to cutting through where you would originally go. And G says, Hot Wing, what are you thinking? As he sees me staring at the entrance of where we're not supposed to go. And I said, Man, I'm going to go through this poodle dog. I'm not scared of it, nor should this poodle dog be scared of me because I'm
Mhm.
going to tread respectfully through the land. Now, all the other hikers are laughing and saying, You're ridiculous. G, who loved me and loved my wild, ridiculous ways, was a little skeptical. He had seen the proof of bugs not biting me, but this poodle dog overgrowing, and you're going to have to get it all over your arms, and you're going to have to move through 10 miles of thick, dense poodle dog brush. After a few minutes of deep conversation, I convinced him to join me, and I told him, You need to walk with these certain attributes in your mind, this respect exuding out of you to the land that you are upon. Well, he said, If I get poodle dog, I'm gonna kill you on the other side. I said, Fair enough, brother. And we walked those 10 miles and we moved through the forest and the poisonous poodle dog in the way that I had suggested that we do. And G was occasionally cursing as we'd be rubbing all over it, and the sticky ointment would be getting on our skin or whatever we had. You couldn't avoid it. Well, at the end of that 10 miles, as dusk was setting into night, G says, If I wake up in the morning with poodle, I know, brother, I know, I say to him. Well, sure enough, neither of us got poodle dog. And G learned a valuable lesson that day. And the valuable lesson that I had been carrying with me was bolstered. And it just feels good to work and move and live upon the land with it versus trampling on it without a care or respect.
I wonder if our ancestors, if you look back 1,000 years or more, hunter gatherers, if they knew these lessons, if they were able to traverse the land with much more grace than we do. Do you think it's a skill that we've unlearned over time?
I certainly think that it has this sort of a forgotten art, a forgotten grace, as you say there. I mean, we've built these constructs to protect ourselves from so many things. And in that self preservation, we've also lost a lot of our original knowledge and communication and relationship with the land. And as we are to be stewards of the earth, that stewardship is harmed in such a way. Now, certainly we have people who spend their careers and their lives focused upon the natural things, but most of us don't. And the millions of people who live in cities or in cement worlds, you put them out in a forest and they might be quite lost and not just in direction.
Yeah, it's true. Before we dive into some of the lessons you've learned while in nature, perhaps you could share a little bit about your why. Why did you start going on these hikes? And as the author of 5 books, what fascinates you? What's your driving force?
I suppose the why really begins at birth, but I am grateful that my parents placed me in environments where I had access to things like the forest. When I was 7 years old, we moved to New Hampshire in a small town on a single stoplight, many dirt roads. And we had acres and acres behind us of forest and land where a young boy like me could just explore and come home when the dinner bell rang. And so I spent most of my time out there. The things that fascinated me the most were certainly the things I alluded to a few minutes ago. But the root of it for me was I had a deep love for our Creator. And God's creation just was this world that I wanted to learn everything about. And so, just as I would observe the beaver, or observe the deer, or observe the lady's slipper hidden quietly in the forest, so too, as I grew older, I wanted to explore these things on grander adventures. I wanted to get out beyond each boundary that grew larger as my age got older. And so, as soon as I was able, I decided to make that the driving force in my life. Adventure was where I wanted to spend my time and how I wanted to learn. I went to
Mm.
school. Those things were valuable up until a certain point, but I needed to be challenged by the larger world. So when I was 24 years old, I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and to me that was very much a rookie season in that kind of endeavor. However, it was not a rookie season to me in terms of adventure. The year before, when I was 23, I was wrangling horses in Wyoming. And wherever I am, I placed myself there intentionally so that I could learn about the land around it. So learning about the indigenous tribes, all the flora and fauna there in Wyoming and the Grand Tetons and the greater Yellowstone area. The year before that, when I was 22, I was at the north rim of the Grand Canyon up on the Kaibab Plateau. And so that northern Arizona rugged landscape filled with the stories of old, many of the things that are absolutely forgotten by modern society. Those are the things that captivated me. Now, the year before that, I was in Hawaii when I was 21, and that was a very different sort of adventure, one that I learned I needed to approach adventure in the future a little differently. For what I did at that time was I wanted a job that put me out there, so I got a job as a photographer on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
Now, a cruise ship is full of very
Interesting.
many people and not very
Yeah.
many animals and trees, you know? So I did have the ability to explore many of the islands, yet that time was limited. I worked 70 hours a week, 7 days a week. And so whenever I was able to fill a gap, I would run out to the beaches and to the mountains and to the volcanoes and everything that Hawaii provided.
Mm.
But each one, I wanted to place myself in a different ecosystem where I could learn a different angle and a different lessons in nature. And so that continued to evolve as I got older. And
Mhm.
it is a foundation that I carry within me. And for myself, a foundation of really the way I think and who I am.
You learn so much from just that direct connection to nature. And it's sad that so many young people, so many kids have never experienced what it's like to even just snorkel around some rocks and see the underwater ecosystem. If you can, of course, a coral reef is mind blowing. But
Right.
going up onto a mountain and just watching the birds interact
Mm.
and seeing the trees, how they grow. Yeah, so important. What are some lessons that you've learned from your long hikes? I know you talk about learning how to achieve massive goals.
Yes. So I read your book, Start with Values, and there were some things in some of my lessons learned and some of the things you talked about that I felt there was some common ground there. You talk about micro habits. And in my time hiking, I created the mentality. I wasn't one who created it. I discovered it in my journey in my mind of taking a macro goal, something large like thousands of miles to hike, or later utilized in writing a long book, and taking that massive goal and breaking it down into however many micro goals it takes to achieve it. And so using again the Appalachian Trail, that really rookie season for that type of large endeavor, especially at the beginning, the sheer magnitude can break you down and humble many to the point where they quit and they don't continue on. It is too large for them to face. If today was so difficult, how is life going to be in 4 months from now? You know, and so for myself, I really began focusing on the things directly in front of me. You know, this mountain, this walk to the next water source, this section of the trail. And there was at times that it was so small that it was simply counting till 10. Hike 10 steps, take a breather, hike another 10 steps, and just keep going. And as I managed to fulfill each micro goal, of course, those build up over time and ultimately lead you to the macro. And so I believe that mentality helped to provide a base for resilience that you can then apply to everything else that life will throw at you. And all of us, none of us avoid any of the big hard things. They all come at different times and often when we're least prepared. And having that kind of mentality it worked as an inner strength to get me through tough things later on.
Mm.
And yet, and I must say this, and yet that is really only just the beginning. One thing I learned about resilience, where it really began with these micro goals leading to a macro and applying that to everything in life, is I am limited. I am limited in the sense that I can only bring myself so far, and I was meant to live a life that is living for Jesus. And when I surrendered my life to Jesus, he then fulfills me with a strength that my own resilience never could have achieved. And so there are so many pieces to lessons that we learn, often in times at different parts of our life. And as they come together as a grander puzzle of understanding in the mind, I really find a lot of beauty in the way that we can look back over our life and understand things that we couldn't understand them in the moment.
Interesting. And that enables you to engage with any challenge just by using the same mindset, knowing that you're there supported by something larger than yourself and being able to break it down into tiny steps and say, okay, so I'm writing a book, for example. Many people want to write a book, but the moment they open a Word document or a journal, they go into a freeze mode because it's too overwhelming. So how would you apply that principle to a book?
Well, when I wrote CINEREAL, which is my recent memoir, it's a long book, 187,000 words. And certainly with each draft, it swelled and then condensed, swelled and condensed. And I could have condensed it even more and I could have swelled it even more. But I needed to start not by looking at that macro, but looking at, first of all, building a foundation. I started with an outline, a structure that I built. These are the things I want to say. This is what the book, its intention is for. These are the goals I have for this project. And much like building a house, you set in the beams, you dig out the basement, you begin your original, you need to take a step into the process versus looking at the final product. And so once you begin movement into a large thing, the next step ahead of you, it may have been shielded by the distant horizon when you began, becomes clear. And so you can move forward knowing that, trusting the process, that what you have been doing has led you to here, and what you do next will lead you to that next step. And so I very much handled the writing of CINEREAL, which is a little different than my previous 4 poetry books, but I handled that process much like I handled hiking a long trail. And I remember, this time last year, I just felt overwhelmed, much like I often felt in some of those earlier in the first half of the Appalachian Trail, where the end seems so far away and my mind may slip from focusing on the present and the duty of today. How am I ever going to achieve this? And then you have to look back to where you are,
Mm,
trust that you will get there by taking one step at a time and continue on.
that's it. Makes a lot of sense. What about discovering beauty and possibility even in the worst situations?
Well, there's duality in everything. And so, in a worse situation, most important thing for me is my relationship with Jesus. And so, in every darkness, he is there, reaching his light down to you. Now, I can say things now, and yet I did not live that way for so long. And so, for much of my life, when it descended into a darkness, the beauty that I was focusing it on wasn't necessarily God at the moment, but rather things that he created. So, through my poetic years of the first four books, for those that read those books, they may see this young man who was trapped in a world of darkness. And yet, I always wanted to look to the beauty that existed, like that sunset, or the way music sounds, the way community holds each other's hands at a funeral, the things that rise above the darkness because the other choice is just to be crumbled beneath the weight of it all. And so
Mm.
as I grew and I began to understand what this light and what this beauty was more, what this goodness was, I started to understand that even in every dark scenario, whether we know him, whether we believe in him, whether we are searching for him or not, every goodness, every beauty, every light is like a ray of his goodness coming down to us. And so I think naturally, just when a soul is burdened with so much weight, like mine was for so long, and I certainly talk in depth about that in my memoir, CINEREAL, in such a time, God's grace is reaching out to us, and we may not recognize it as Him, but that beauty is Him. And so there were many times where just writing a line in a poem about the shimmering aspen leaves or the way sunlight glints off the top of water, even when my heart was dark and low, those rays of God's grace and goodness kept me going. And for the artist in me, I just needed to write a poem about it or play a song about it or in some way capture it and then release it as a bird that others may see it flying by. And I hope that answers your question, but
It
that's
does.
where would always search for beauty.
Mm. And you can find beauty anywhere if you look for it. Even a ray of light in a dark room can be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. I love the way you describe it it's almost like listening to a poem interacting with you. So I appreciate it very much. Tell me about alcohol and your relationship with it.
Sure. We broke up. I began drinking as kind of like a lot of my buddies did. At least I thought that's how I began drinking. I entered high school and you start experimenting with the things that are available. For the first 2 years on the outside, it looked like I was just another teenager having a little bit of fun. Now, sports were my priority, so I wouldn't let drinking affect those negatively. However, there was a lot more going on underneath the surface. When I was a young boy, my mother presented to me who Jesus was and helped me to understand who he was. And I fell in love, or rather grew in love with Jesus. But some darkness entered my life and stirred things up. And when that did, my footing lost its hold and I didn't really know what to believe in anymore. And within that entered a large amount of spiritual warfare in my life. To say these things out loud don't necessarily hold the same weight as they can inside one's soul, you know? But for me, I was tortured by demons during my teenage years. And these demons, both vivid and audible, always encouraged me to hurt myself. And yet, when I drank alcohol, the demons would hush. Now, I didn't
Mm.
understand it then, but when I was drinking alcohol, I was hurting myself. So no wonder they would kind of quiet down a little bit. But it became from a very young age, I started having this secret drinking in my life. So while I was partying with friends and experimenting and the outside perspective was, oh, he's all right. He's just going through what most young people may do here and there. Beneath all that, I was drinking secretly to keep this spiritual warfare, to keep these demons quiet. Now I grew, I entered this adventurous young adulthood, which I outlined a tad of it there a minute ago. And everywhere I went, the secret drinking continued to grow in my life. As I got stronger and stronger, running up mountains and exercising daily and just the robustness of my youth was coming into full form. The drinking continued underneath the surface. I could party harder than all my friends, and I was deemed a legend for such things. But the reason I could do that was because my tolerance was so strong. And so after
Mm,
the party, after the stumble home, after all the ridiculousness, I would withdraw into my dark, quiet heart, one that had fallen away from Jesus, my first love, and I would drink to silence those demonic noises. Well, something like that doesn't just go away, that my drinking was starting to get out of hand. And around the Pacific Crest Trail when I was 26, I think it started to really bloom into a problem. The first time I was ever called an alcoholic was when I was living up in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado around the age of 28. And I got into a fight with this old man, not a fist fight, but a verbal argument when he said, "Wing, you are nothing but an alcoholic." And I swore back at him because I couldn't take that. I had never looked at myself as that. No, I was simply one who compartmentalized this quiet, wild darkness to keep it from affecting others. And I had everything under control, but it was starting to ooze out into my relationships, into the world, and everything was absolutely not under control. Alcohol was starting to take over.
mm,
I, facing that, turned more towards defiance and rebellion. If someone didn't like the way I was, I simply didn't let them have any of my time. I would go my own way, more and more withdrawing into that darkness now, which was no longer a quote unquote safe space for me, but it was just eroding me from within. My organs, my spirit, my soul, my mind, everything. In my 30s, it only continued to get worse. Now, in my poetry books, which I wrote in my 30s, there are there are glimpses into my understanding that this alcohol was really getting out of control, and I desired a life beyond the addiction. And yet I had no idea how to do that. I
mm,
did know that I should return to Christ. I knew that in my rejection of him, I was rejecting the greatest love in the world. And yet in my darkness, this prison cell that had been growing more and more around me of this addiction, the knowledge of one thing is far different than the doing of it. And my ego and my pride grew and grew and grew like a rusty just corrosion within me. Now things really started to get out of control. On the exterior, people still thought I was just this wild guy. I was an artist. He drinks. This is what he does. And then look at the beautiful poems he creates. But inside, I was dying, both physically and allegorically. God, in his infinite faithfulness and grace, provided many people in my life over these decades who would come to me and either call me out on my horrible living, or they would recognize that deeper pain within me and say, "You need to give this to him. He has called you and you have run away from him." And when everyone would do that, I would shut it out and continue in my ways. Now, on January 17, 2020, when COVID was just knocking on the door and about to enter the United States of America, I went through a brutal murder attempt on my life.
mm,
And there in the 1:30 a.m. out, laying in the snow by the train tracks, unable to move, drugged, beaten, on the one breath away from death, I heard a loud voice call to me, a voice that is unrecognizable when you hear it, whether you want to hear it, thought it would come or not. "Move or you will die." It stirred me from my traumatic brain injury slumber, and yet I could not move. And so I fell into my near death repose again, and yet, "Move or you will die," sliced through the darkness, and it pulled me up and gave me the strength to crawl out of there until I got home to my dog and fell upon my floor. I was rushed to the emergency room not too long after that, and the medical things then began to take part. And in my reflection of it all, for it takes time to try to understand what happens to you when people intentionally try to kill you. It
Mm.
was a weird feeling, one that I had never carried before. And although it carried flavors of torment and horror, it also carried a note of mutual understanding, for I had reached a point in my life where I too wanted myself dead. I too did not believe that I should keep living, and I too was slowly killing myself. And so for them to expedite the job, well, I almost understood them.
Mm.
But there was that major, most important part of it, which was God saved my life. He woke me up. He lifted me from the doorstep of death. And I could not ignore that the way that I ignored so many humans who would come through my life and said, Wing, you need Jesus. And I would turn away. Here is God saying, Wing, shaking me by the very core of my soul. Now, regrettably, it took me 2.5 years of spiraling even deeper into a darkness than I already was, drinking a minimum of 20 drinks every single day for those 2.5 years. And in my book, CINEREAL, the chapter I described this is called My Dark Ages. Those were an awful 33 months. And
Mm.
within those alcohol tormented months where I could not put down the bottle because every time I did, I would have seizures. As I walked the line of drinking was killing me and not drinking will kill me, as I faced the fact that God was calling me and had not given up on me. Why did he let me live? What does he want from me? How do I get out of this? And I drank and I sought God, and I drank and I sought God, and I battled the demons who had exponentiated more than they ever had in my life. And every day their visuals were coming in from my peripherals, and every night my mind was tormented by their calls and their cackles. Near the end of that 33 months, I knew that I needed to make a change. And I started a healing journey, and yet I started my healing journey in the wrong way. I should have fallen on my face before the Almighty and repented and let go of my pride. And yet I was still holding on to it for some foolish reason. I do not know why. I was so deeply entrenched in the darkness. Satan had his grip in me so much. Alcohol for me was a portal of that darkness. And as I poured the fierce brown liquor down my throat, that darkness just continued to consume me. At the end of autumn 2022, God won. Snowflakes were starting to fall from the sky. I was sitting by my cackling fire. The ground was frozen. Here in Bend, Oregon, having a proper winter to come. Unlike this one, I knew that the time was now or I would never make the right choice. Consumed with the understanding of what Jesus' love is, of what he has done for me and each one of us, ashamed isn't a strong enough a word, but filled with the shame of how I had been rejecting him and understanding how faithful he had been in my life and how he had called me for decades. And then remembering that joy of Jesus, my first love that my mother had instilled in me, and trembling with those two faculties of shame and love for our Savior, I fell on the frozen ground and tears started pouring from my eyes. And I called out to God, and he was right there. Where is the boy who loved me? He said. I'm right here, Lord. I'm right here. Where is the boy who loved me? I'm right here, Lord. Now that was a powerful night. And God will meet us wherever we are at, and yet he will not leave us where we are at. And so thus began the true journey into ridding alcohol from my life. When I awoke in the morning, none of it a dream, all of it so real, my soul redeemed by Christ. All of those demons that had been tormenting me for so long silenced the moment that I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. He silenced all the darkness. And I woke up realizing as I crawled to the bottle and I took the first sip because I needed to stay alive, Lord, I need you to help me rid this alcohol from my life. So I searched for and found a alcohol detox program so that I could medically get detox under the supervision of professionals. I couldn't go without 8 hours without having a seizure, without having a drink, without having a seizure. And so I
Mm.
walked that fine line right into that first alcohol detox door, and the real journey of ridding alcohol from my life began. I had made a decision at that point to surrender my pride, surrender my all, and to give my life to Jesus. And now I no longer had to battle that darkness which I had for so many decades, which had started seemingly small and grown into an all encompassing torment. And life began to shine with beauty, unlike I had ever seen it. And I had to face all of those things. And it was difficult and I was messy. I made it through one alcohol detox. A while later, I needed a second. I ended up going through 4 alcohol detoxes until it truly stuck.
Mm.
But when it truly stuck, it wasn't the things I had done, it was Christ removing that thorn out of my side because so long I had laid it before him. And so long I had asked him to take it from me. And he finally did. And now I don't live with a desire or a temptation for alcohol anymore. I don't get triggered or bothered when I see others drink it. It is like living a new life that I didn't deserve to have. And so every single day, I thank Jesus for the freedom that he has given me, not just from my alcohol addiction, but my freedom from being a slave to sin, and that he has redeemed my soul. And now every day I live for him. And when I see someone else struggling, I'm able to put an either physical or allegorical arm around them. Say, I'm here for you and I know a way forward, the truest and most worthy way forward. And so I do not regret my alcohol addiction or the darkness I had to live through. I do regret falling away from Christ for all those years, but he has taken that and is using it for good now. And he is now a servant in him who is able to reach out and help others that are in need. So that is what my relationship with alcohol has been.
Wow. Complicated, messy, but you got there. You got there. What does scenario mean?
CINEREAL, a rarely used word, and I love rarely used words, means of or like ashes. It also refers to the gray matter in the brain, which alcohol destroys. So, in my poetic artistic spin, I named my memoir CINEREAL. And while the reader may enter the book not knowing what the word means, when they leave, it all comes together. And about halfway through the book, well, 2/3 through the book, you enter part two. And part one is my howling tease, and part two is from death to life. So I begin from death to life, really setting a second story foundation for the reader. And that's where they begin to understand why I called the book CINEREAL. And it leads you all the way to the very last sentence of the book, which is that last hammer strike upon the nail head that holds the whole house together.
I love it. I love it. And where can people find the book? Where would you like them to go? And I have one more question for you after that. But if anyone's interested in exploring your work, where would you like them to go?
I think the most direct way is straight to my website, wingwilliams.com. From there, you can access my Instagram, find a way to get a hold of me through email or Instagram. But really, you can purchase my book anywhere. I mean, I know a lot of people like to buy on Amazon. Go ahead. Local independent bookstore, if they aren't carrying it, they can order it for you. So I would suggest wherever people prefer to spend their money, you can buy it there. But I have it all set up. So on wingwilliams.com, you've got links to many of the options, and it's a good landing page.
Perfect. Excellent. When are you going to start a podcast, Wing?
Well, right now I am growing in this side of being a guest. I'm in the growing stages of many things. It's
Hmm.
beautiful how life works. You know, we look at all the roads, all the paths we've taken that bring us to right here.
Hmm.
And CINEREAL opened many doors for me that would not have been opened if not for writing it. And I would not have written CINEREAL if God hadn't said to me, I want you to write this book, Wing. Stand for me as a servant for you. Tell of my glory, for none of this is for me. It is all for him. It is all with the desire that others may come to know Jesus. And so right now, I am continuing the process of having conversations with wonderful people like you on the other side of the country and friends here, new friends here in my own town and wherever God places me. But when the time is right, that growth will naturally proceed into the next steps. I have two books that I have set foundational outline structures for, and I
Hmm.
will know at the right time when I will progress with each of those, but that is soon. And I also am potentially building a blog that I am going to, for a different kind of way to share writing and connect with others, that I will integrate into my website soon. So there are a lot of projects that are right now in their structural stages, but for all of 2025, man, I call that year my exhale year, my creative exhale year. I wrote
Nice.
and I poured, and right now I am inhaling. Just as I read your book, I've read 5 books this January so far. So right now I'm inhaling wisdom and growth, God's word every day. And so when I am ready, then perhaps a podcast will be in my future.
I like it. Perhaps we could finish off with a memorable, perhaps a funny tale from one of your adventures, perhaps a wildlife encounter or something like that.
There are a lot there are a lot to choose from. I will share one that I did share this one in my book. And while there are many other wildlife encounters, this one remains one of my favorite. I was in Northern California on the Pacific Crest Trail. The season was summer. The land was dry. For many miles, there would not be any water. The night before, I had gotten drunk on whiskey with the demons on top of a cliff below another, stuck between two precipices of grand rock. I had myself a dark, dark night. I woke up very dehydrated, and foolishly, I forgot about the amount of water I was carrying and why I was carrying a certain amount of water and when my next water supply would be. So I guzzled it to satiate my idiotic self, the drunken fool. As I hiked along, I realized that I had made a great mistake. In order to reach the next water source, I would need to hike late into the night. And I was not moving nimbly, I tell you. I was slugging along. And there in the golden hour of around 5 p.m., as the sun was descending to my left, which was the west as I trekked north, slicing through the corridor of trees, landing upon its alleyed spots, I heard the scurry of an animal. And from the uphill eastern side of me, across the trail towards the downhill left side of me, in one of these golden ray beams of setting sun, was this magnificent Wolverine. Now, Wolverines are nasty and big, and by nasty, I mean they carry an attitude. And I did not know what kind of interaction this would be in the first half second. You know, every time I see a bear, your heart kind of jumps until you realize, oh, he's scared of me too, usually. But this Wolverine held no aggression. In fact, what this Wolverine did is it stopped and it looked at me as I looked at him. He then descended to the west, slightly down the hill. And as I now scurried up to the spot where my eyes had first met his, I looked down and the Wolverine was but a few paces away, his head turned looking back up at me as if it was trying to convey a message. And the message was not one of aggression or leave this spot. It was almost a beckon. So I couldn't believe what I was doing, but I slowly veered off trail and stepped down towards this master of predation. And the Wolverine continued along, and every few steps he turned back and looked at me again, as if saying, come with me, Hotwing, come with me, Hotwing, my trail name. And so I followed this Wolverine for a little bit, occasionally muttering to myself, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. And then taking an eye of local landmarks. So as I got further from the trail, I didn't ultimately get lost in the forest, especially with my dehydration. The last time I saw the Wolverine, I heard a trickle of water. There was no water on my guidebooks or any of my maps. And yet the trickle of water was so faint and so true, and you could almost smell its purity in the air. And there in the lush little pocket of a steep descending mountain was just a few drops at a time, a natural clean spring coming right
Mm.
out of the side of the mountain, a few 100 feet of elevation below where I had departed from the trail. And the Wolverine had led me to water. Now, as the Wolverine continued on, and I amazed by all that occurred, and I thanked the Wolverine. Thank you for leading me here. I sat back down at the water, filled with a renewed joy, and one drop at a time, filled my water bottles and guzzled, and I sat there watching the descending sun. And I realized this water was much like what Jesus provides us. This living water. It was almost as an example to what I needed in my life. And yet at that time, I wasn't ready. I was 26, and it wouldn't be till I was 37 that I surrendered my life to Jesus. But Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are thirsty, and I will give you drink from an eternal water. He is life." And this Wolverine to water became a monumental line in my poetic endeavors, a memory that I would never forsake, and a deeper truth that ultimately, when I did finally give my life to Christ, I was like, oh man, Lord, you were looking out for me then, even in the form of a wild Wolverine.
What a perfect way to finish off. If anyone's interested, please check out the links. They're in the show notes below. And thank you again, Wing.